I recently made a video about the heritage of Heruli. I mentioned it in other videos. For example, The Greatest Secret Ever Told, I think it was, where I documented how Genghis Khan and the Mongols are connected with the Heruli, the Germanic tribe which settled Iceland. And I'm not the only one who knows this history, and many people know this history. And it's interesting that, for example, the best, if you want academic resource, like, can you give me a reference, for example? Someone, sorry, I'm removing my socks, using my toes. I just came in. I'm always barefoot at home, but I just removed my socks because I just came in with the dogs. They want to go straight outside again. There's such a snowstorm these days. They don't get proper exercise, but I take them more often outside. But it's too much snow for us to walk really properly, and they're irritated because they like to play in snow. But yeah, where was I? Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, if you want an academic reference, the best reference to begin the study of Heruli is this book here. It's only in Icelandic. Barði Guðmundsson, Uppruni Íslendinga. This guy was, he headed the National Archives of Iceland, and he was a historian, and he was also a congressman. But also, if you want a really good info on the settlement of Iceland and how the first National Congress was founded, this guy also, Jón Jónsson Aðils, he also was a historian, one of our first historians. This book was written in, I think, 1904, and it's an excellent documentation on many of the things that I talk about, both of these books. But there are other books also. They're in the libraries in Iceland. So you just have to learn some Icelandic and spend some time in the Icelandic library. It's time well spent because there is magic in Icelandic language. Almost nobody, no one outside Iceland understands that magic, and almost nobody in Iceland currently. But it was well known 1,000 years ago. Anyway, and just check out my videos. I should make some. Maybe I should put some keywords so to make it easier for people to find which videos of mine document what. But in reality, you just have to study my archives. They will teach you stuff. You can join the dots. You will find that it's not so. But once you get into my world, you will not so easily turn back to the petrified, golemized ghoul world you raised in. What a start to a video. I'm absent-minded tonight. It's Friday night. Christmas will soon come. But I want to tell you about the first republic of humanity. If you have heard anything of history, you will know that 500 years before the birth of Jesus, there was a Roman Republic. You will also know that at similar time in history, there was a republic in Athens in Greece. Those were not republics. Those were democracies. A republic and a democracy is not the same thing. A republic is a certain implementation of the idea of a democracy. Democracy is where the ruling elite makes people believe that there is a republic, but are actually using shadow power to rule. So that people don't see if there is a monarch or a national assembly or whatever it is. It's a deception. Democracy, deception, demonic. Demonic, democracy, deceptions. Sorry, I just had my dinner. Now. But let's call them republic, since history likes to, his story, the story of the Satanic Empire, likes to call it his story. So, it's called republic, let's call it republic, alright? You have been told that there was an Athenian republic and a Roman republic. Alright, let's just keep it that way. But it was in both instances organized in such a way that only free citizens or citizens who owned something, some property, could be voted into the assembly or senate. And more often than not, they represented merchants or landowners or some other individuals or entities from the ruling elite. These were representative democracies. The public, the plebiscite public, the man on the street, had no say in it, none whatsoever. But the idea had been born of forming a nation state, letting everyone participate. Now, when the Heruli were traveling in north of Caucasus, east of Crimea, they met with people who knew about these ideas. This is something like 5, 6, 7 centuries later. And they were Germanic, and Germanic tribes were already using a similar way of doing things. The Germanic tribes in Germania and in Scandinavia used to form some kind of assemblies, but those assemblies usually were advisory to the tribal leader or the monarch or the king of the tribe. So they had a kind of dual system of tyrant and democracy, and more often than not, in the Germanic tribes, it was the same system as in Athens and Rome, where only the people who were of ownership and influence could be partaking in the assemblies. So you see, when and that's why I refer you to my recent video about, I'll link it in the card section, about the heritage of the Heruli who settled Iceland. That when they, after their travels through Europe, eventually settled Iceland, they were already aware of the idea of democracy, but for some reason, and probably because of the secret of the white stone from the book of the Apocalypse, they realized that it was a deception, and they were well versed in deception. Check out my video, the Viking Conspiracy Part 1, where I document the deceptions of the names of Helluland, Vinland, Greenland and Iceland, and I've also mentioned it elsewhere. I recently mentioned it in one of my dailies, and I put a subtitle, Helluland. I joined my dots over a large horizon. Now, so when they are in Iceland, they are aware that to safeguard something precious, you need deception. They formed some way of making sure that people who wouldn't understand this would end up in Greenland. And that people who understood this would find Iceland but that the people who would safeguard the white stone would but I want to focus in this talk on this short video of mine, which I'm finding such a hard find, 10 minutes, and I'm still not really started on the main theme. You see, on 10th of December 926, 10th of December 926. Just imagine how long time ago it is. Now it's 2015. We're seeing that it's 1,100 years minus 10 minus 1. You do the math. I am terrible at math. So, on 10th of December 1926, one of the most powerful and influential men in the community of the Icelandic settlers, Thorsteinn Ingólfsson, decides that it's time to create the first real republic in human history. A republic where every individual in the land can participate, and where peaceful resistance or passive resistance and a legalized boycott will be used to make sure that the ruling elite will always obey the public. Created in such a way that the public, which you just look at the narrative or the discourse amongst the public today, people are simply mad. They have been raised through social engineering actually for centuries to not be able to handle this kind of power. But there in 926, this guy has been thinking about this for his middle age. His father came to the country 50 years earlier. He's born and raised in Iceland. He's been thinking about how can I empower the little man to appreciate and facilitate the power that true republic actually means. The nature of self-empowerment and positive transformation of an entire nation. And he comes up with an idea, and this is why the date is important, because the date lives in human history in Iceland. Because 10th of December 2012, this idea was reborn in Iceland on the same date. And now in 6 days, there will be exactly 3 years since it was re-inspired. And these numbers matter. You will soon see why. He decides that come spring, he will finance 2 men who he trusts. One of them to travel to Norway to stay for 3 years with other Heruli people in Norway, just to study oral law, nothing else. And he finances him to sail to Norway in the spring, stay for 3 years and study oral law amongst other Heruli in Norway, people who were not ready yet to settle in Iceland or in mainland, or more precisely in Helluland, where the other assemblies, where the other national republic was formed. No one will tell you that. The Masons have almost erased that history. We are just resurrecting that part of history. Now, I am uncovering it. As far as I know, the only one who has uncovered it. Now, but other people will follow in my wake and find the facts to prove it. I am sure of it. I cannot present you with facts. I can only present you with the dots on how I uncovered it. So don't believe me, wait for those who will prove it. It will be proved. Now, he also finances another guy, and these 2 men were nephews of each other. They were relatives. He finances another guy to travel the entire country of Iceland, which is similar in size as Ireland and, the Republic of Ireland, similar in size. And he travels to the other parts of the Iceland which were already ruled by small time, not monarchs, but regional lords. Every section of the country, we would probably call it counties today, where, or let's just say regions, there were 36 regions in the country where a settler or a large farmer or a local lord had acquired ownership over most of the region or the county and ruled it. So for 3 years, this guy, this representative, travels the country, talks with all of these powerful men, and attempts to convince them of resigning their power to local assemblies, where every individual, man, woman, slave, everyone above a certain age, anyone can have a voice, and to have those assemblies in the beginning of every May, the month of May. That there would always be a certain date, a week, I think it's a week before the full moon, I think, that they would have an assembly in their region, each of these 36 regions, and they would attempt to create an assembly, local assembly in every country and region, where every region would decide on how to self-govern their own region through law and not through the Lord. And the Lord would simply be a spiritual leader. He would assume the responsibility of spiritual and religious leadership only. And that was a compromise, so that the Lord would retain the status of being in the elite, that he would be the responsible guy for, assembling an army if needed, or gathering taxes if needed, and so forth, and making sure that laws were followed, and so forth and so on. So it was a little bit of compromise there. Now imagine, in the first summer of this journey, 927, this guy, he gets an unanimous response from all of these guys which he meets, where everyone agrees to it. Just imagine, there are no telephones, no cars, no written history. Everyone is more or less illiterate. The Vikings were illiterate generally. They have no knowledge of Rome and Athens. None. Keep also in mind that in history of all republics of mankind, what's the time? 18 minutes. That in history of all the republics in mankind, they are all formed in populous cities, where there's a lot of literacy and a large section of the population can devote their time to trade, commerce, study, academia, and so forth. But this is a farming culture here in Iceland. People didn't really have much time for metaphysical discussions or abstract thinking or study of books or writing or much less to create books. Creating books in those times was very difficult. Paper had not been invented yet. You had to use skin or import some kind of a fabric to write on. Very, very expensive. And everything was handwritten. You couldn't make a mistake. You need really serious scholars to create books. So these people, they didn't really know the things we know today. They had to rely on their intellect and their insight and their inspiration and their, let's say, humanitarian values. The age of humanism was live and kicking with these people. Believing in yourself and believing in your neighbors, believing that you can settle things peacefully and agreeably. And I think it is a feat in itself that they all said yes. They all agreed to participate. Everyone agreed. There is no account of anyone disagreeing to this idea. It was easily sold, and it took 3 years for him to travel the entire country and talk to everyone. And everyone agreed. And in the story, the public story, the Masonic version of the story, we are told that he traveled the country to find a suitable area for the Alþing, the National Assembly. That's bullshit. Þorsteinn Ingólfsson had already suggested a suitable place in his own area of settlement, in a place called Þingvellir, or the Fields of Assembly. This representative who was financed to travel the country, he simply suggested, when powerful and influential people had agreed to the idea, he suggested we'll meet on that date in Þingvellir. And Þingvellir was suitably positioned. It was relatively easy for people all over the country to travel to Þingvellir, even from the farthest regions, relatively speaking. And while this is going on, Þorsteinn was spending some of his fortune to acquire the land of Þingvellir, to make sure that no one owned it, that the National Assembly would own it itself. And he had to manipulate, he had to pull some strings, and one guy had to be sent for ostracization, to be ostracized from the country. That was the most severe law in the country. It was a guy who persisted that his land would be used, and he was ostracized for it. But he got money for it. But he was just a very persistent. He belonged to the tribe of no-no animals. Have you heard of no-no animals? They exist now everywhere in the world. No-no animals. You know how to hunt no-no animals. That's the only way to get some sense into no-no animals, is to whip out a weapon and chase them or try to shoot them, and they will just scream no, 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 and run away. That's how you treat no-no animals. That's the only way to get some sense into them. They usually look like humans, but they are no-no animals nonetheless. So, no bloodshed, just, we humans still ostracize no-no animals. I hope I'm a yes animal. I'm just being funny. It's my kind of humor. I know how weird my humor is. Please, don't hurt my feelings about it. Now, so fast forward the story. On a Thursday, in the week of summer solstice, people from all over the country meet. Look, in May, early May, 6 weeks earlier, there are regional assemblies all over the country. And in those regional assemblies, women could participate, they could present cases, they could participate in discussion of laws. So could slaves. They had a system of doing this, so that if you were a free guy who owned your own farm, you had a little bit more prestige and so forth, but everyone could speak, everyone could participate in discussions. And there was very strict law that if the elite in the region didn't appear on Þing, or the assembly, they were automatically ostracized by law. And in those assemblies, as had been agreed during the previous 3 years, every assembly chose 15 representatives to ride to the National Assembly in Alþing. So every local assembly had decided what to discuss nationally, who should represent it, and made a decree that every representative who rode to the National Assembly, he had to represent the cases entrusted to him. That he could not change his mind or have his vote being bought off or something like that, like it is in representative galleries today. You see, the idea was that the regional assemblies were every May. So if you actually didn't play your part in the National Assembly, if you had been chosen to write to the National Assembly at Alþing, if you didn't stand your part on behalf of your regional assembly, we call it in Icelandic Héraðsþing, you wouldn't be voted to be a representative again. You see, now in the deceptocracies of the demonic democracies, you just belong to the party, and if you can behave like an idiot, and you're always voted back in because you're part of the party. It's a totally demonic thingy. But the National Republic thought quite the other way, that you represent your nation, and your nation is your tribe, the people who live around you, the people in your community, even if they're not all of the same language or the same faith. It's like, because in the settlement of Iceland, there were people from Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Scotland and Faroe Islands and even Germany and even Russia. There were people from all over in Iceland. But people didn't believe at this time, 1,000 years ago, 1,100 years ago, they didn't believe in the genetic nation, the genetic sense of being a nation. You, as a member of a nation, belonged to the tribal thingy, the tribal sensation, that you belong to the people of the same mind and spirit, the same way of worldview. So an Arab could actually move to Iceland, and if he would assimilate himself with the worldview around him, he would become automatically part of that nation, even if his language skills hadn't caught up yet. That was the thinking at the time. And so if you were voted to represent your region in the National Assembly, you followed suit. No egotistical, self-centered, bribed attitudes. So on Thursday, 1100 years ago, in the year 930, we will see, in 15 years precisely, this will be exactly 1100 years ago. 1111. Great things are afoot. On Thursday, before summer solstice, you know that summer solstice is always on Saturday, around the 21st of June. They made a rule that they always meet on Thursday before summer solstice, and that the thing or assembly will be sanctified spiritually, because religion was involved, that it would be sanctified on that day, and the members of the ruling elite from every region in the country, if they would not be present, they would be automatically ostracized. This was a very serious thing. So there, on a Thursday, near 930, 3.5 years after the idea first sprang, a relatively short time given the way of travel and communication at the time, and that there's no newspapers, there are no letters, there's no written documentation. That day, the guy who had studied law with the other Herule in Norway, he was present, and he presented the laws orally. The tradition was that this guy, who is called the law keeper of the assembly, law keeper or the law sayer or the law speaker of the assembly, it's called in Icelandic lögsögumaður, or the saying, the soothsayer, the sayers of the law, the one who remembers the oral version of the law, and he would present every year or annually 1/3 of the law. He was responsible to remembering the law. And from every region in the country, there was also another lögsögumaður, or lawsayer, or law speaker, who was tasked with knowing the same laws, so that when the lawsayer of Alþingi, when he spoke out, or when he presented the oral law, that he could be corrected if he misremembered something. So this was a communal thing, you see. And no one was above the law. No one. And now in Alþingi, women could not represent. They could do so locally. They could do so in the regions, and also slaves. But women could choose or ask a member in the local assembly to represent her in the National Assembly in Alþingi, if she felt needed. So they were not excluded. They just had a different form for harmony. For example, there in 930, the only country in Europe, it was the only I told you, my dogs are irritated, and Birta was asking for something, and she's going to get what she needs, but I already know what she needs. I already know what she wants, I know her. But, you know, I have German Shepherds, they can be quite forceful. Sometimes you have to be very strict. So, in the year 930, women could divorce their husbands. For example, if a woman could prove or somehow represent her case in such a way that it was beyond doubt that her husband had not had sex with her in 3 years, she could legally divorce him, for example. There were many other rules about this, but women could basically divorce their husbands, you know. The Catholic Church removed this after it came to the country. Just think about that. The Masonic Catholic Church. Now, also, women, for example, could be spiritual leaders in this community. Regional leaders, or, you know, as I told you about these fief lords or regional lords, there were many women who were lords of that kind at the time, who had ownerships of large areas of land and had people in their employments, or even small armies and so forth and so on. Many of them are named and known today, and even own ships. The Heruli people had no problems with equality of the sexes, but they had it in their own way to keep what they would refer to or understand as natural harmony, because there are differences between the sexes, but mutual respect. Respect is such a powerful concept. For example, it was not uncommon that women were the equivalent of what you would call a priest or a bishop. It was called goðar in those days, a person who represented the religion and headed the religious ceremonies and advices and insights and so forth. You would call them priests, but they were called goðar. It was very common, and even the equivalent of bishops. For example, there was always a goði called allsherjar goði, who was the kind of a leader of the entire national religion, who was the head priest, so to say, or the bishop, equivalent of a bishop he was. And so women could actually assume those roles, and these people, they facilitated the self-empowerment and positive transformation of the nation. This was successful. You will hear a lot of stories from this area about bloodshed and fighting and hero worship and so forth. But most of these stories, if you go deep into those stories, you will discover that they were more or less just the movies of the time, just stories. It is explained in many of the old stories and sagas of Iceland that people preferred the legal solution. They preferred settlement. They preferred discourse. They preferred debate and dialogue. They preferred to settle things and to find the peaceful solution which benefited everyone. Of course, this was not perfect. Of course, this wasn't always the case. Of course, but generally speaking, this was a successful system. And just think about this: that in year 995 and onwards, Christianity had appeared in the land, and because the Norwegian king had become Christian and under the influence of the Masonic Catholics. And Masonic Catholicism doesn't like this kind of thinking. They want to rule, they want to govern, they want to erase free soul. They are Tisselers. The Masons are ruling behind the church. They have always had their agenda to acquire freedom and bind it and chisel it and destroy it. They like to do that to souls, and the national soul as well. So the King of Norway had started sending missionaries to Iceland, and a lot of people in Iceland were beginning to buy into Christianity and for a very simple reason. Christianity promises you that you don't have to do anything to get to heaven. That you just have to maintain good thoughts and obeisance to the church. And that is very easy for a small-time, narrow-minded farmer, or the modern academic, or the modern educated intellectual, or the modern uneducated golem. But in the Norse tradition, you only go to heaven or Asgard if you fought, if you were willing to sacrifice yourself. Not sacrifice yourself willingly, but if you were willing to enter a battle and take the chance of the outcome that you might or might not survive it. They believe that you only could get to heaven if you fight for it. And those who die in old age or because of the sickness, they go to hell, Helluland, the nice, easy and quiet, dark land of those who don't stand for anything. Those go to Helluland in America. Deception again. I haven't completed to decipher those deceptions yet. But Christianity promised that you don't have to stand for anything to get to heaven. But the old Nordic tradition of the Aesir requires you to stand for something. Otherwise you'll be nothing. You'll be forgotten like those who go to Helluland. And so from 995 onwards, Christianity is acquiring the country. You might find it interesting, because I am a monotheistic prophet. You might find it interesting, my fascination with the old Norse tradition, and that I speak so easily of elves and trolls and angels and demons and lots of metaphysical beings. Aren't you monotheistic? Yes. I don't see these entities as gods. I don't see them as specifically all-powerful or something. Many of them are powerful. But I am not brainwashed Christian or brainwashed Jew or brainwashed Muslim. Though they are idolaters. They have the monotheistic Abrahamic tradition behind them. Zoroaster and Abraham had a very similar worldviews. Zoroaster and Abraham came from the same area at the same time. They knew each other's stories. They probably didn't know each other. I haven't seen that yet. But I've maintained for a long time that they both came from the same area around the same time and for the same reason, that they were inspired by similar ideas, as I am myself. But you have to keep in mind that there is a huge divide or a Grand Canyon between faith and religion. I see no difference between an organized religion being Catholic or Judaic or Islam or Taoist or Buddhist or the Norse tradition. These are just organized, abstract, metaphysical ideas to use to enslave people's souls, and not by God, but by humans and demons, and led on by Mason. The Masons actually are at the heart of this great deception. But so for me, I find no problem with identifying a troll in a mountain. You know, trolls are fantastic beings. They can also believe in God, you know. But I will tell you more about trolls another time. But in 999, there was a problem in the country because the Christian part of the population wasn't sure if they agreed with the lawmaking process. They weren't sure, and they were of course led by the priests who wanted to acquire power over the national republic. The normal person didn't see that. They didn't see the instigators of the foreign authorities. But let's put that aside. What we are seeing is that, you see, as I mentioned about the nation, the national identity had a lot to do with the worldview, and lawmaking issue had a lot to do with the worldview as well. You create laws according to the ethics of your worldview. People have forgotten this today, because in the secular society, people have been chiseled into agreement with a particular worldview. People do not understand today the creative and dynamic mindset of diverse worldviews. You know, that has been forgotten today. The Masons have had 1,000 years to make sure that they manipulate your mind properly and control it. Iceland was one of the last outposts of keeping spiritual freedom alive. This was the Light from the North, first version. But in 999 there was almost a civil war in the country because the Christians wanted their own national assembly because of this law-giving purpose of being in some harmony with the worldview and the faith and the spiritual way of seeing things. This is why the word secular was invented, seclusive, keeping out of the worldview. The worldview we are raised in is a narrow-minded, shallow, short-sighted, seclusive worldview, which only includes what the Masons have appropriated not appropriated, but appropriated for you, appropriated for you, given you, dished out for you. It leaves out 80% or 90% or 99% of what you can actually include in a worldview. Logically, even, and harmoniously. And it's fantastic how difficult it is for the brainwashed, petrified golem to see that. But these people 11 centuries ago, they could see it. And here comes one of the most fantastic way of thinking ever devised in history. It shows the enormous power incorporated in quantum democracy. Check out all my blog articles and videos about quantum democracy. The leader of the National Republic was asked to find a settlement for this disagreement with people to avoid civil war. And he was a heathen, he was a pagan, he was of the Nordic tradition. And he thinks about this for 3 days. In seclusion, he just went into a tent and just stayed there for 3 days. He probably had 2 virgins with him to give him massage. And thought about this. And he ended up saying and suggesting to the National Assembly Landers agree that the National Republic becomes Christian, and that outwardly and publicly, and particularly in relation to foreign countries, Christianity now becomes the national religion. But the old pagan tradition of the nation is still legal in hiding. That you can essentially be of any faith and religion you want to be, as long as you keep it in hiding, it will be respected. In essence, the priest, therefore, would not have the legal option of persecuting you for practicing your faith as long as you kept it hidden in some way. This was a fantastic compromise. This was the first legally established religious freedom in humanity. And it was created in a national referendum. The Masonic nation states today, with demonic democracy of representative slime, they can't even allow people to have national referendum. In the National Republic, which has been resurrected, we resurrected it on the same day, first day before summer solstice, in June 2013, 2.5 years ago. It has its own constitution, legal constitution, and is still the only lawfully legal enterprise in the country. I will tell you more about that. I have much to tell you about this fantastic story. And the time is up. It's 46 minutes. I find that I wanted, in this short talk, I wanted to keep it only half an hour and tell you this story and some more aspects to it. But I also wanted to tell you how it was taken down. But it seems that I don't have time for that. So until then, quantum democracy rules. So in my last video I was telling you about the founding of the first and only true democracy in human history. I need to tell you more things about it in order for you to understand how powerful it was. But it was defeated by a more powerful force. And later its history was rewritten or altered in such a way that people don't understand it anymore or even know about it. For example, the official version of Alþing, the first parliament in Europe, has been presented in such a way that you get the feeling as there was a state which suddenly created a parliament, and then they took up Christianity, and then they became like everybody else. The story has been filtered through to you. It has been made unimportant. It's a historical event, yeah, but let's move on. Unimportant. And then directed to other things, and you get a feeling that it was just a normal nation state which later became part of Denmark. For some reason, for the last 100 years or so, this story has been like a bubble in oil. You know these oil lamps where bubbles slowly rise to the surface? This is rising to the surface now. And so let me continue. I mentioned in my last talk that the National Republic of Iceland, the ancient National Republic of Iceland, or the National Republic of Ancient Iceland, there is no name for this in English. It's part of the Masonic slime deceiving us about it. They call it the Commonwealth of Iceland, but it was a national republic. The concept of national republic does not really exist today. The current narrative in secular societies, created by the Masons basically, has erased this concept. and people have been, and it has even been demonized because people will begin to believe that it has something to do with National Socialism, which in certain aspects it can. But National Socialism in Germany was fascism, which was based on leaderism, the leader principle. So is communism. You don't think that Social Democrats are communists, but they are socialists. So are communists. So are National Socialists. This is a soup. There's a fly in my soup. Demonization. Be serious. Party democracy is also based on the leader principle. So are all religions based on leader principle. Monotheism and national republic is not based on leaderism. It's based on the sense of strong, spiritual, and wise community. That's what it is. So, anyway, let's move on with the story. As I told you in my last video, the National Republic of Iceland, the first National Republic of Iceland, because the second National Republic of Iceland has been founded, and based on this heritage, which we have uncovered painstakingly. The first National Republic was founded on Thursday at summer solstice in 930 CE, Common Era. And it happily moved along until around 1200. So you see, in 300 years, people had been basically happy with it. Of course there were problems. Of course it was a child of its time. But I want to explain to you the legalized boycott. It is a fantastic idea. And it has in no country, no nation state, no monarchy, no tyranny, nowhere in history ever has legalized boycott been a tradition. It was implemented in this way. If you lived in a region and you attended your assembly, everything was fine. And as it goes with human society, there always forms an elite. And you have the bishops and priests, and you have the Goði, but Goði was disappearing because of the Christianization. But you always have the regional leader. But regional leader doesn't really hold any power. He holds an executive power. Because the regional assembly holds the power of legalization, of creating legality. And now the regional assembly gathers every year in May. And so that's where it is decided what's going to be happening in the region, legality or executively and so forth and so on. So they created a safeguard. If the leader of the community and the one who gathers the taxes and has the power to create an army or police force, if he oversteps the boundaries of what the community has expected of him, the community, every member of the community, has self-governing authority. It works in this way. You can declare yourself as a member of the next region, the closest region to yours, or even on the other side of the country if you want. You can declare yourself as a citizen of any assembly in the country without moving. You don't have, no one has the right to impose on you on which regional assembly you attend to discuss laws, regulations and problems, or court. You decide that yourself. That means that if, for example, let's say that you live in region A, and your leader is overstepping the limits of the expectations made from him. He's overtaxing, or he's overspending, or he's abusing his authority, like his police authority or something else. Then you can start a discussion with your other members of your community and en masse redeclare your citizenship as a member of another community. That means that you take away his taxation. You pay your taxes in another community. That bankrupts your leader. That strips him of his power. This does not exist in your demonic, leaderized, deceptional democracy, does it? No. They impose taxes on you and they enforce it through police authority or child appropriation services or anything else. You see how powerful the National Republic was. Now, the Norwegian king, financed by Rome and Roman Catholic authorities, starts funding sedition in the country. He starts financing a family of powerful people, which were called Sturlungar. And they start an uprising in various regions of the country, and they start trying to finance other insurgents and so forth and so on, and also through their assemblies try to begin to infiltrate the discussion of uniting the National Republic with the Kingdom of Norway. And most people didn't want that. But a lot of people are greedy, a lot of people are superficial, a lot of people bought into the money, because the people who sided with the Norwegian king, they got rich pretty fast. So over the period of the next 60 years, this takes between 40 and 60 years, there is more or less an turmoil in the country, financed by the NATO authorities in Norway. Oh, sorry, NATO didn't exist by then. Well, Rome at the time, Catholic Rome, was equivalent of Washington DC, United Nations, Neo-Rome, Masonic slime. You call it NATO today. Which is also actually, look at the logo for NATO. They also name themselves as OTAN. Basically, they're just admitting that they are the two-headed God. The Roman god of Janus. Janus was the two-headed god in Rome. Two names, two faces. A deception. So let's just call the Norwegian king of 1260 a NATO representative. But he was not named Jens Stoltenberg at that time. But I'm pretty sure that Jens Stoltenberg is his descendant. And that was not a compliment. So for 40 to 60 years they finance the golems of Iceland until they actually win. But they didn't win in such a way that Norway would overpower and conquer the National Republic of Iceland. It came to a standstill, the Civil War. The Norwegian financed Civil War came to a standstill, a peace agreement. And it is the first state alliance or state federation created in history. They created a new nation state, basically, but it was named Norway. Norway continued to be an autonomous country with a king. The National Republic of Iceland continued to be a national autonomy with the National Assembly and the local regional assemblies. It continued to keep its own lawmaking entity, but the King of Norway became the national emblem of their country. It became was kings and queens have made. It's not unlike the British Commonwealth, where Queen Elizabeth is the monarch of Australia and the monarch of Canada and so forth and so on, but its countries are autonomous. This basically meant that a portion of Icelandic taxation went to Norway, that Iceland didn't maintain its own army, but Norway promised to protect their autonomy and promised certain business assurances, that shipping lines were opened and commerce were thriving. Protected commerce, basically. And it took 2 years for the National Republic of Iceland to agree to this. The agreements were signed in 1262, but it took 2 years for the regional assemblies to agree on this, because you see, the regional assemblies were basically autonomous. The National Republic was essentially a federation of Iceland. Now, 50 years later, a new king arises in Denmark, in Norway, and that king decides to change the rules, and he starts to appoint his own earls, an earl, a sir, a lordship of all the regions of Iceland. He starts sending out Norwegian earls to become the leaders of all the regional assemblies in Iceland, to start the process of acquiring a supreme power over all the regions, to start kind of Norwegianize them and combine them into the Norwegian nation state. Now, as I told you, there had been a tradition of legalized boycott in Iceland. The people of Iceland knew the power of unifying themselves in passive resistance. Passive resistance basically means that you stop obeying the authority silently, but you never really oppose it. When the police authorities come and force you to do something, you do it. But the moment they move out, you reward that, basically. They can force you into one direction, but the moment they move out, you do whatever you please. But you do it peacefully. You do it with persistence and imagination. So, in the years between 1305 and 1315, when the Norwegian king was trying to manipulate Iceland to become a Norwegian county, basically, people in Iceland began boycotting the regional assemblies and the National Assembly, and find ways of boycotting taxes as well, in different ways. And people just unified themselves in doing this, and without doing it in one pattern, they maintained dynamicity to not to be too predictive or predictable. And the Norwegian king gave in, and this wasn't tried again. History happens, and within a century or two after this, the state of Denmark and the state of Norway come under the same king and queen, basically. Not unlike Scotland and England became two nation states unified with one monarch. So for quite some time, until 1662, the two countries of Norway and Denmark were two independent states, but shared one monarchy. They had each separate assemblies. But in 1660, between 1660 and 1662, long time ago, something happens in Denmark, that the king of Denmark decides to change the rules. You see, in Scandinavian countries, it had been more or less the custom that the king was elected by the National Assembly. No one told you that. This has been changed in the last 2 centuries, but this used to be a tradition that the king used to be elected in some way, or different ways sometimes, by the elite, by the lords and earls of the country, not by the public. So that So often the kings inherited their seat, but they had to abide by the assembly of the earl system. And this king decided to change those rules. And it took him 2 or 3 or 4 years to pull it through. But, he had more powerful armies than the fiefdoms and earls under him. And when he had finished doing this in Norway and Denmark and basically just created a tyrannical system, he did the same in Iceland. He sent a galley, an admiral to Iceland, who gathered the lawgiver or lawsayer of Althing, the National Assembly in Iceland, gathered them to a place called Kópavogur and forced them, under the threat of guns, forced them to sign an agreement that they basically had to sign that Iceland was part of this. I don't know how to put this exactly in English. It's so easy for me in Icelandic. Let's see if I can put this correctly. The agreement basically meant that Iceland belonged solely as a country to the king, just like every other countries in nation states in Europe, where the country itself and all the lands and all the people belonged to the king. That's how all these countries were governed for a long time, and that's how the earldoms or the lorddoms the fiefdoms were established, because the king gives a land to the lord or a fief lord, and the fief lord rules in the name of the king, but the king owns the land, and the lord pays taxes and submits soldiers to the king. That kind of system. But you see, from 930 until 1262 there is this national republic. But from 1262 to 1264 basically, until 1662, another 4 centuries, there is still the national republic and is still autonomous, but with a monarch as a head of state, but effectively powerless. In 1662, the Danish monarch forces the national republic to submit to his will under force of arms. But the thing is that when this is made, the signature, the document where the lawsayer, his name was Árni, I don't remember what his surname, let's just say Árni something, who was, I'm bad with names, Árni, who was the lawsayer of Alþingi, the head of state of Alþingi, exactly, he signs the agreement, and some of the people with him. You see, they had no authority to do it. This was never agreed in the regional assemblies. This was never agreed upon on Alþingi, the National Assembly. Neither the regional assemblies nor the National Assembly of the National Republic, they never signed off their power. Denmark simply took power, and no one had the guts to resist him, or the intelligence to the system anymore. It had somehow been washed out. And this actually means, because this document does not exist. I have asked the National Archives of Iceland, and they have told me nobody knows if this document exists, or if it exists, where it would be. It doesn't exist. And the current democratic Republic of Iceland, it's called, actually, if you look up the nation state of Iceland now, you will see that it calls itself the Republic of Iceland. The Republic of Iceland. Do not confuse that with the National Republic of Iceland. The names can be deceiving in this, but that the democratic Republic of Iceland, the Democratic Republic of Iceland, which is now ruling the country, is actually a usurper, a country which rules under the power of NATO, the power of the Danish king. The Danish king takes power in 1662, then establishes an autonomic region in 1874. That then becomes the Kingdom of Iceland in 1918 or 1920. 1918 it is established, but the constitution, and the Danish monarch gives a constitution, therefore, to Iceland in 1874. That constitution is a little bit reshaped in 1918, and that constitution is then reshaped again in 1944, when the kingdom is demolished and a president is elected instead. But it's still the same constitution, the same elite runs the country, the same lawgivers form it, and it is not an Alþingi. It names itself Alþingi, but it is actually a national parliament. It's just a nation-state parliament, just like a congress. It's just a congress, really. So, I'm just skipping here swiftly through how the National Republic was demolished, but in 2013, in June 2013, a group of a few Icelanders, I was amongst them, we went to Alþingi, the old National Assembly place, the original Alþingi, and we reinstated the ancient National Republic. We call it the resurrected National Republic. And now, for 2.5 years, we have believed in this nation state, this new nation state, this actually resurrected nation state. We have re-established a constitution for it, and the first law. We have accepted the first law, and this is today is just a micronation. But I have researched this extensively through law and constitutional methods and constitutional traditions. I have, in the last few months, exposed the Democratic Republic of Iceland to be a fraud, to be unlawful. I have exposed this, and I have proved this legally, and a lot of people in Iceland have observed this and agree with me. No one from the establishment or authorities have even bothered to attempt to debate me on this. I have proved beyond reasonable doubt that the National Republic is the lawful entity of governance of Iceland, that it is basically overrun by usurpers and a NATO instituted what's it called, overthrow of power, and there's no doubt. But 99% of Icelanders don't know this. 99% of Icelanders have no clue about this, and it's phenomenally interesting to notice how these people who have spent 15 to 20 or up to 25 years in schools, or 20 years in schools, they know nothing about their own history. Most people in Iceland wouldn't be able to tell you this history. They only know the school version of this history, and that's phenomenally weird. Because what I'm telling you is based on good research. Just go to any library in Iceland and you will find books on the National Republic, and you read for a few days, and soon you will see the great picture. And I'm sorry that I couldn't present this story in a more interesting or organized or skillful way, but I'm mainly just doing this video for documentation purposes in English. All of this has been documented in Icelandic. I've been very active for the past few years, documenting these truths, because this is the true story of Iceland, and a moving one. But you would have to understand the constitution of the National Republic, micronation, to understand that. Anyway,